And I think, yeah, we've sort of circling around this sort of capacity capability conversation, and how you support the organization through change. And it's probably worth calling out, I guess, sort of having the honesty conversation that we work in an organization where we support people by delivering change management, change delivery services, coaching, leadership coaching, consultancy. Oh my goodness, let's put the word out there and everyone can go, oh, we don't want to talk about consultants, But the reality is there's a real challenge here about how you engage that capacity and capability support. Because as Dom and Louise have just said, there's so much of the knowledge and ability sits in the organization. It's about releasing that to do the best it can do, which is to Dom's piece around, how do we help people to be the best version of themselves? When it comes to leading change can only happen from the people in the organization. Authentic leadership is led from people in the organization who are part of the organization, who believe in the organization. And some of the challenge and I think, to be fair, some of the fear that organizations have when they look at that capacity capability challenge is this kind of sense of, oh, we're going to bring a bunch of consultants in who are going to do change to us. They won't understand what we're doing. It will just be a shed load of money we waste, and we won't get any further. And I think, that is a fair concern to have. And I think when we're looking at this, you kind of got a bit of a trade-off, really, because you've got that fear of spending a shed load of money on people who are just going to tell you what to do and not necessarily help. But on the other hand, you've got a capacity capability gap that you're going to fry yourself if you try and do all of this yourself, and you don't necessarily have all of the knowledge and skills or all of the capacity to do it. So somehow you've got to trade those two paradoxes, if you like. And so I think for me, it's very much about recognizing where we have gaps. And I think there is something very enabling about understanding gaps around scale of change, human change, how we move people through change. Recognizing, though, that the delivery of some of that stuff is totally dependent on people in the organization, not outside. And understanding how to find people to support the organization that actually can work alongside, fill some of those gaps, but enable the leadership, enable the organization to go on that journey. It's kind of a little bit to that sort of coaching piece, but it's about finding people who can help you be the best version of yourself as an individual or as an organization. Sometimes that is finding people who can carry the heavy luggage for you, because it allows you to go off and do other things that actually you can deliver far more value to the organization by doing. Sometimes it is having that external voice that just says, hey, not sure that's necessarily going to be the best way to do things. We might need to think about doing it differently. And having people who can have that honesty conversation in a respectful way, so you avoid some of the bear traps that are in this. But it is very much being brave enough, in a way, to actually take that decision to ask for help or get the right sort of help, as opposed to being uncertain. I really want to say afraid, but it's kind of, it's not that leaders are afraid necessarily. I just think that with some reasonable justification, there is a real concern within local government, but also, to be honest, within private sector as well, about, am I just going to spend a load of money on a load of suits that are actually going to come in and not deliver any real value? And I totally get that. But the contra to that is we used to have you were saying earlier about, it tends to often be the same people who step up in these situations. Back in my day, back in corporate world, we used to have an expression that you would always have people who would deliver this through personal heroics. They would be the people who just move mountains to make this happen. What we often saw in our change programs, though, was 2 or 3 years later, those personal heroes had become personal martyrs, and they'd actually died for the cause. because they burnt themselves out by trying to lift too many heavy weights themselves. And I think that's my real concern in complex, big scale changes like this, that actually the leaders, the people who really are invested in making this happen and putting huge energy, the workforce, actually end up burnt out at the end of it because they're carrying too much load.
Yeah, I think there's something about underestimation because of the time frame that this is in, which is so short, actually, and the uncertainty up to the point where you know that you're paired with, or the three councils you're going to work with. It's easy to underestimate how much time and resource this is going to take. However, by the time you get to that point, every week then counts, because you're moving towards this date of the 1st of April 2028, and there is no stopping that. So I think there's a lot of that one of the things that people can do leaders can do right now, is unpack to the greatest extent possible the realities of the resource they're going to need, based on a real strong estimation of how much it's going to take, because it's likely to be more than they initially suspected.
Yeah.
It makes sense to, I don't know much about a lot of things, but it makes sense to plan, that old phrase, plan for the worst and hope for the best. If you front load the resource and the capability, and then you can sort of thin it out as time going on, rather than realise halfway through the programme you're going to miss the target way off, and you haven't done all those things, and you've lost some really good people along the way, and then you're trying to capture it the whole time. And I think the point you were trying to make, Paul, about suits coming in and making stuff happen, if they look at their options, if councils look at their options now and choose the right third parties that will work with them hand in hand, rather than forcing them into things they don't know or understand, they've got more of a chance of getting it right, because it's really hard to recover when you're falling behind the whole time, because you're constantly trying to get ahead, sort of thing. So makes a lot of sense on that from that side of things. So, and is it better if they're underestimating it? It's always better to probably overestimate. So.
Yeah, and I think we're talking to lots of different things. When we talk to change delivery and some of the challenges and what could go wrong and stuff with change delivery, I think one of the conversations that we've had previously is, you can't switch these resources on just like that, So to your point about when you fall behind the curve, to recover is actually not just a case of playing catch up. It's a case of you need to throw double the resource to catch up what you've missed, but actually double the resource isn't available. And it takes 2 months to secure that resource. And suddenly, you've got this real challenge around, you can't, this is part of the planning and it's part of the delivery challenge, is you can't switch this capacity and capability on overnight. You have to be able, otherwise you will just switch on the wrong resources. You can go out and recruit X number of people, but if they're not the right people and they're not doing the right jobs, you've not achieved anything.
There's another challenge out there at the moment, because so many local authorities are going through this at the moment. Actually, the pool is the same pool for everybody, and those experts are are already working on. Dom's a great example. Yeah, you're already working with a few local authorities out there. The SMEs are being depleted. So actually, when an organisation does perhaps wake up slightly later, that they actually might not be able to tap into the SMEs that they actually need, those experts that they actually need. And I've experienced that myself within, the area that I live in. We've very, very quickly woken up to say, we're going to need some planning consultants, before everybody else wakes up, and we're going to go out there and get the best ones. But that was fortuitous, because somebody had the foresight to say, we better get out there before everybody else wakes up and taps on the same, expertise pool.
Yeah, I don't think anyone ever came up with the adage, you can never have enough consultants, but it might in this case start to become slightly true, because
exactly, yeah.
Being brutally honest, local government is slightly weird to other parts of to other organisations. So it does take a relatively in-depth knowledge to be able to hit the ground running in that area. It's not something you can just go in, right, I've done this before in this area, I can replicate. It's quite special.
Yeah, absolutely.
That'll become a new tagline, won't it? You can never have enough consultants.
Sounds like a moneymaker, that one.
Well, you can never have too many. Yeah.
Just have some more, why not? That's the reality is it's harder to spin things up quickly than it is to ramp things down slowly, if that makes sense. In progress, I'm guessing, what's your opinion of when you've seen projects and programs go wrong where we had too much resource at the beginning and you thin it out, or versus let's pile in loads at the end because we need to make it happen?
I mean, your classic project management curve, isn't it? You know, there's two competing ski ramps or two competing curves that cross like that. And what always happens is we start with X effort and we end up with 10 times X effort because we have to keep trying to catch up with things to hit the end date. And in reality, what we should start with is 10 times X effort and ramp it down as we get closer to the end date. And people use that as an analogy for project management and planning. You know, the more effort you put in up front into building a plan, the less effort you will have to put in at the end to delivering it, because you have it laid out. And I think there is a lot of truth in that approach.
Absolutely. I don't know how many times through my entire career I've said, please engage us early. You know, it's you know, it's absolutely true. What you invest up front will pay back dividends as you go along, and actually end up being probably cheaper for people as well, you know, from a cost point of view. That's my experience.
Yeah, speaking from personal, the way I view contracts is I go into an organisation always looking for the earliest way out and to leave them in the best possible state.
Place.
Looking, how can I stay here longer? How can I leave as quickly as possible, leaving them with in the best possible state to continue on after I've gone.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that. And it's kind of part of the way that we approach the world, really, when we're talking, without getting on my soapbox, but, you know, we talk about how do we become better at doing change? How do we not be the dinosaur generation that actually we didn't do change and therefore everything went wrong around us? And some of that embedded into the way we approach life and work is how do we help people get better at change? And that's that piece around going in, educating and supporting people in doing change so they actually build the skills themselves. Because the last thing you want is every time you do a change to have to call someone else in to do it. What you need to do in today's world, and just look out the window, put BBC News website on, the world's crazy. Everything's changing all the time. So as an organisation, private sector, public sector, governmental, you have to be superb now at doing change. And it's about creating that organisational capability. The best world in my view would be a world where actually there weren't any change consultants, because every organisation knew how to do it. They actually could do it for themselves, and we were all actually employees of organisations helping organisations do it rather than be externals trying to educate, because that would mean as organisations and even as society we'd got so good at doing change it became an endemic part of our capability. End of sermon.
Yeah, I think it's that, you know, helping organisations build that capability and you know, kind of weaning them off the dependency on, you know, external consultants. You know, and I think, you know, I'm not speaking, you know, but I think Changemaker's philosophy is exactly the same as yours, Dom, which is leaving that legacy, you know, with an organisation that they become self-sustainable in that capability. You know, rather than this kind of the dependency that, you know, going to cast aspersions on other organisations, but, you know, that other organisations may not necessarily share the same philosophy.
If you've got good people coming in with the right intentions, it's about how you make them feel at the end of it. Like you said, if you've got a programme of work where it's all rushed towards the end, we sort of got them in, you know, their objective was to get it done. it's not delivered in the right way, perhaps, or the best way possible. And if it's done in an organised way, because we did plenty of decent planning, we got great resourcing, we held their hand and walked them through the process, they're going to have less anxiety around that. And it's about how you make them feel and getting the right people engaged, because there's a huge, where I come at, how I feel about things is a massive human cost. All those staff members going through all that stress. It's stressful enough when things feel uncertain, but if you don't get the project right, if you're not supporting people, if you're not communicating effectively, they're going to have 12, 18 months, 2 years of stress whilst they're just trying to do their jobs, while they're just trying to raise their families, while they're just trying to pay their bills. Why make it harder? You can spend less and do more if you do it right in the first place, rather than burying your head in the sand and going, well, we'll just get it done. Everyone's at 99% capacity. Well, let's just give them another 20%. It's actually just, what can we do better from that perspective, and look after our staff? It's the best thing you can do, is just do it right from the off. I don't know whether I'm right or wrong in that. It's just my outsider's view looking in.
I think you're spot on, Wes. I think one of the things that I think organisations broadly, right across the piece, actually, there is, people have got a day job, people are max, they come to work, they want to do a good job, right? I'm a big believer in people, that's what people want to do. And then you're adding on this additional extra layer of work that they've got to do, which is, perhaps to do with LGR, what have you. But actually, you haven't given anybody the brain power to process the change, this actual human change journey. And what everything that's going through somebody's head about, my job security, my, how do I keep the roof over my family, and how can I actually, kind of create a career here in this new world, and all of these things. And then the skills, the upskilling they've got to do. A lot of these people probably haven't interviewed for years, or probably haven't written a CV for years. How are we going to give them time to be able to prepare themselves for this new organisation, which they might have to, for example, they might have to go through a 2P, exercise, or they might have to go through, a kind of applying for roles in the new world. We haven't even given them time for that. If they're already working at 99%, and they've got to have some additional LGR work, and they've just got to have space just to process themselves, their own personal journey. This is huge stress for people. So it's implicit upon organisations to start to think about, how do we give people space and time to actually process themselves through this journey.